Okay, do you see that presentation? Yeah. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Steve Colley. I am a principal consultant here at my business, Waypoint College Consulting. I'm also the director of the MIHO program with Mamas Unidas, where we help first generation low income Hispanic students here in Central Arkansas. And I am here with Wendell Scales. Wendell, you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. Wendell Scales. I serve as the Deputy Director of Innovation at Arkansas Lighthouse Charter Schools.
Thanks. So thanks for joining us today. So today we're going to talk about college access policy in Arkansas, and I'm going to give you a rundown on Advocacy 101. So basically showing you some tips on how to advocate for our students, advocate for college access issues, and then we're going to segue into the top three policy issues that Wendell and I were discussing, and we would love your input. So we'll have an open discussion at the end where we can answer your questions and get input from you guys. And then we'll discuss next steps from there. Um, so why do I advocate? You're going to notice that in this presentation, it's all about storytelling. Um, when we advocate for legislators or we're telling the story of the people who don't have the voice. And just to give you a little bit of my background, before I started Waypoint College Consulting and got into college advising, I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked on Capitol Hill for a few years. Um, Worked in the U.S. Senate, worked for a senator on military appropriations, worked in a committee on Veterans Affairs, and then I also worked in the House of Representatives on military issues as well. Lived in DC for several years, so I kind of know the life down there. So I'm going to bring to you some of the stories that I've seen and also kind of what it looks like on the other side of the table when we have passionate advocates coming to, talk about all the different issues around America. And so I'll give it to you from that lens and then be happy to answer, any questions. Um, all right. Also, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. We'll be happy to try to answer those as much as possible, or at least at the end. So today, what I want to talk about are ways to affect change through the legislative process. Talk about the importance of legislative advocacy. I'm sure a lot of you guys already know what the Arkansas legislative process is, but for those that might be a little rusty on it or haven't really seen it, we'll go over that to get everyone on the same page. I'll give you some strategies for effective advocacy, how to engage with legislators, give you a couple tools and resources, and then I'll show you the policy pillars of NACAC, which is what SACAC follows. All right, so we'll try to stay within our lane from SACAC's perspective on the policy initiatives that they care about. So let me go ahead and move on. So what is legislative advocacy? Here's a picture of Representative John Lewis, former John Lewis, meeting with his constituents. Advocacy is actively supporting and influencing public policy. It's making sure that legislators understand and can align with the interests that you deal with on a daily basis. And for us, it's students and educators. And they want to hear from their constituents. They were elected to office to serve us. And one thing that I want to mention as we move along in this presentation is that, you know, I do understand that there is a lot of partisan politics in our nation, and that's something that we're not going to get into. It is definitely something to take into consideration when you talk to a lot of the legislators. But here, what I want to kind of discuss is just how the public narrative can help affect change and how we can influence that change from our grassroots level. So the importance of legislative advocacy. So there are key impacts to this. If I, with a lot of other counselors, or I, with a lot of other advocates for, say, veterans issues, I'm a military veteran, advocate for changing certain regulations that help veterans access, hospitals a little bit better. It's our voices, our collective voices that will cause influence and help formulate policies. And quite honestly, a lot of legislators and staff members, they really want to hear from folks. They'll create listening sessions with the community to help implement change more effectively. A lot of times, the reason why implementation processes don't go as effective as it should is because there aren't that many people at the table. And I understand that sometimes the table can be shut, for some people, and that's a problem. Um, we also can have impact in resource allocation, influences how resources are distributed, and raising awareness and generate public support on the important issues we face. You know, Trying to engage with the community and inform a community, to have a collective effort when we impact, different policies. So why does it matter? Um, when we get together, it ensures diverse voices and perspectives are considered. There's so many advocacy groups in America. When I lived on Capitol Hill for a couple of years, I mean, they would have advocacy groups and lobbyist groups of all different types, coming to share their experiences with us. And it was quite fascinating to see as a staffer, and a lot of my colleagues, really wanted to try to take care of those people as best as possible. Um, you know, I also, as a staff member, when I worked on the Hill, I always wanted to help make laws more effective, understanding that people have different priorities, different perspectives on how policies should be enacted. That's when politics gets into play. But to try to help create compromise, really, that's when all the voices come together, and sharing the stories that we have. And it helps create social impact. Um, so the role of the advocate, you know, I would always tell, colleagues of mine who were in the advocacy world, say, if it's not me, then who? Who else is going to do this? And there are a lot of other change agents out there, but believe it or not, not as many as you may think. Um, and so you see this picture here. This is the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, and you have Native Americans that are discussing certain issues. And the lady on the far left, um, when I met her, she had never advocated before, and testified before Congress, and she was very nervous. It was very intimidating, and I know the staff members had to remind her that these legislators, they put their pants on the same way we all do, all right, and they want to hear your voice, and that's why you were invited. And she was able to tell her story, and it was an amazing story, something that we couldn't see. We had to see it through her eyes. So it was important that she was there to educate and inform. Um, and the other members that are with her and the members behind her are part of her coalition that helps strengthen the impact. When a staff member wants to say, "Hey, I've got a policy proposal that my boss has. I need some input on this. Let's have a listening session and bring all the stakeholders together." Um, or we might not know what kind of changes have to be made, and then we get people that come and meet with us, have cold calls or meet with us randomly, and raises the awareness to us where we're like, wow, that's something that we should probably do. um, so moving on to the state level, which is very similar. Understanding the Arkansas legislative process. So the Arkansas General Assembly is very similar to the U.S. Congress. Contains two chambers. Um, House of Representatives, it has 100 members, and the Senate that has 35 members. The Arkansas General Assembly sessions, they have a regular session and they have a fiscal session, in opposing years. So odd number of years, regular session lasts about 60 days. They can extend that. And usually regular sessions are meant for, um, you know, legis legislation that changes different laws and mandates, whereas the fiscal session is more in regards to the budget and paying all the programs in Arkansas. Um, then there are special sessions where the governor can call for a special session during interim periods, and I'm sure you've seen that happen from time to time in the news. And the leadership in both the Senate and the House is the lieutenant governor is the president of the Senate, just like the U.S. Senate is the vice president. And then the House is the speaker, very similar to the U.S. House of Representatives. So, what is the legislative process in Arkansas? Um, you know, I'm sure we've all seen Schoolhouse Rock, How to Become a Bill. Um, you know, and I think to become an effective advocate, we have to understand the process. So I'll just kind of briefly go over this. I'm sure a lot of you know this already, but just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, I'll just kind of briefly go over this. I'm not going to go over this. This seems a little complicated. This is how a bill becomes law in Arkansas. I will try to simplify this by showing you how the U.S. Congress does it, which is very similar. Um, so yes, it's a little bit complicated as well, but I'll just kind of run through this, maybe use an example to kind of show you. So um, let's say we have a group of advocates that raise an issue to their representative, okay, a member of the House of Representatives. Okay. In our case, if you're here in Central Arkansas, that would be Congressman French Hill. Or if you're within a specific district, that would be your state representative who would introduce the bill for you and try to understand all the issues around it. Okay. So the introduction of a bill a lot of times takes time because they have to research what it will do, what the impact will be, how much money it's going to cost. Does this fall in line with the politics and policy initiatives for that representative? And that's a case that we have to make as advocates, and understand kind of like how the sausage is made for them and how we can make it easier for them, to, so to speak, make the sausage. Um, so the second part is bill is sent to committee of jurisdiction. So once they introduce the bill, they'll send it to the bill of jurisdiction. So let's say it's um, you know, a veterans bill, for example, it will go to the Veterans Affairs Committee, and they will take a deeper dive on it, do more research with the committee staff. They'll probably bring in people to testify to kind of get expert advice on this. And then they'll debate it within the committee. So that's the committee review process. And then they'll vote on the bill. And if it passes the committee, they'll send it to what we call the floor, which is the entire House of Representatives in this instance. And the House of Representatives will set some time aside for all members to debate it, to discuss it, and then to vote on it. And if it passes the House, then it goes to the next level, which can either be to the Senate or the president. So in our scenario here, since we introduced the bill through the House, they would send it to the Senate. And guess what? The Senate will have to do the entire same process. And if they pass the bill that is exactly identical to the House's bill, then it'll go to the president. But if we change a comma or two and a couple words here and there, it has to go back to the House. So how do we avoid that? We bring both chambers together in what we call a conference committee with the two committees to kind of make it a little bit more effective so that we can kind of streamline the process a little bit faster. Okay. And if you look in the news, you'll see that a lot of those types of bills get put into these omnibus bills that you probably hear in the news, these big bills that have tons of little bills attached to them. There's a lot of politics that go involved in that, and I won't get into that. But just understand that as an advocate, there are different areas that you can inject yourself in if you wanted to make change happen. Okay. If we were going to advocate for, say, high school counselor retention or more funding, for, public school system or whatever the case may be. Okay. Whatever the case may be that falls in line with the policy pillars of NACAC, which is what we're here for, and SACAC. It would be important to be strategic about how we communicate our agenda and our stories, because really our narrative really helps move this along. Okay. And so understanding like how a bill can be introduced and how it might be more effective if you introduce the same bill in both chambers and have both the senator and the representative speaking to one another so it can streamline the process, or knowing some people in the committee and knowing how that process works. So a lot of advocates that are out there. Um, you know, there's the term lobbyist, which can have kind of a rings kind of like a bad name a little bit, but there are lobbyists of all different, colors and stripes, who are advocating for a lot of different initiatives, whether you agree with them or not. But this is the process that they do. All right. And they be strategic about, their messaging to this. Okay. I just wanted to show you the bigger picture of this, and not to, scare anyone on like how this works, but really to understand like if I'm going to get involved in this and I'm going to share my story of the things that I'm seeing, my students struggle with or my colleagues struggle with, where can we send our story to? And these are different parts of the system that you could do that. The Arkansas General Assembly does it the same way. Okay. Um, so who are the stakeholders in the Arkansas General Assembly within the jurisdiction of what we're talking about, higher education? So the Education Committee chairman in the House is Representative Brian Evans. The vice chair is Keith Brooks. And then they have a higher education subcommittee. So they have various subcommittees under the major education committee. And these are the representatives for that education subcommittee. Folks that we should want to talk to if this is something that we want to advocate for. And in the Senate, they only have one overall education committee, as far as I understand. This is the chair and vice chair. I'd be curious to know if folks know some of these people, probably. And then there's also the Arkansas Legislative Council. So it's kind of like a joint committee. So on Capitol Hill and DC, they have joint committees. Here in Arkansas, we have joint committees as well. There's a joint committee on higher education, and they basically oversee all matters of higher education at any time. So even like during the off periods, they're going to kind of meet and talk about certain things regarding higher education. And these are the co-chairs and vice chairs. So how do we talk with a legislator? Just like you would talk to any professional or colleague. Okay. Um, they have a title, but they're just like us. And the majority of them are passionate. Okay. They went into the business to get elected. A lot of them started off with, with a lot of passion into it. I get it. Some of them, things have changed and we won't get into that. But for the vast majority of folks and people that I have met and known on both sides of the aisle, they mean well. They just have different perspectives. Um, Understand that when you talk to legislators, you are an expert in your field. You have enough experience in your role to share your stories. Don't feel intimidated. These elected officials, they're not in higher education or counselors or admissions officers. So they don't know. They're going to lean on your experience, you know, assuming that they're going to agree with what you're bringing to them. Um, Understand also that legislators are busy. Okay. Just like you would be courteous to some of your colleagues who are busy, keep your coordination with them and their staff simple. Make it easier for them. Okay. When I was a staffer in the US Senate, I think on average, I probably had, I don't know, anywhere from like 5 to 8 meetings a day with various advocacy groups and lobbyists and executives and government officials. So they have very busy schedules. Um, and if you want them to remember your story and remember what you're pushing, um, bring a one pager with all the stuff that you talked about. Connect with them via email so they have your email address so that you guys can continue the conversations. Um, and all of them, including myself when I was working there, we love stories. That's how we remember your issues. And that's how, you know, politicians got elected, was through stories. And sometimes you'll find that they'll use your story, when they're advocating on your behalf. So I'm going to kind of go through just step by step on how this works. So for legislative meetings, we're going to talk about preparing for the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. Um, so during the preparation of a legislative meeting, say you're going to meet um, a state representative, or say you're going to meet some committee staff, education committee staff. maybe a group of legislators that want to hear you out. Um, or say, next year, Wendell and I will kind of discuss this, but we would like to do an in-person event at the state capitol, something we were trying to do this year, but it fell through for a variety of reasons that we can discuss later. Um, but when we meet with them, it'll be incumbent on us to do our research, to strategize our conversation, to know what our ask is, and it can be simple. And if you're going alone, to create your elevator pitch, um, something quick, right? So just imagine having a 30-minute session with somebody and just, going through it quickly, effectively. So you want to prepare that message. Here's some tools and resources very briefly. I mean, there's a lot more out there that can kind of help us, with this. Um, so NACAC Advocacy has a lot of resources. That's their website, and we'll share this presentation through SACAC, as well as the recording, obviously. Um, SACAC Government Relations, that's their website. The Arkansas Department of Higher Education, those are the current policies that they're following. So that's the latest link. The Arkansas Joint Committee on Higher Education, that's their link. If you want to know when the state legislature is meeting for, you know, in session votes or, committee hearings or, all those types of things, that's the link for their calendars and meetings. And then one that I really liked a lot, especially if I'm researching policy issues, is the Congressional Research Service. So, um, the Library of Congress has um, a subdivision that works directly for the US Congress. They're kind of like a think tank that provides a lot of detailed policy research. And the way that they produce their research is very concise and like really quick to understand because they're meant for very busy policymakers. And so you can literally Google any topic, um, type in higher education congressional research service, and there'll probably be a variety of reports that are just, very easy to digest, easy to share. And if you ever need to do any kind of research regarding policy issues, you know, and that's the website where you can find a lot of information and all these types of reports. And they're creating reports all the time. And the Congressional Research Service has um, experts in literally every field. When I worked on Capitol Hill, I was surprised at how many experts they had, and I could just call them up and say, hey, my boss wants, um, he wants to understand the history of UFOs. And guess what? They would generate a history of UFOs and what the government did with it. As silly as that may sound, like they could put together a lot of this information very quickly and in a very professional manner. All these guys are PhDs in all different topics. So, and this is public access too. So I think that's a great resource. There's a lot of other resources out there, obviously, and I'm sure you guys have some. I would love to learn more, but um, this is just some stuff that can help you prepare. So during the meeting, um, obviously you'll coordinate with a staff member or directly with a state representative to coordinate, when you're going to meet, who's going to be there. And just like any other meeting, quick introduction, maybe with an elevator pitch, building some rapport so that they remember you. Um, it's a lot of the policymakers are politicians. They like to grow the roller deck. You know, um, they're they like to have as many contacts as possible, and people who are come from diverse fields. So when we tell them stories, and they can remember that, and they'll say, "Oh, I want to get in touch with that person to talk about this issue that I care about." Um, and I've had many meetings where we would have discussions and briefings from folks who are very passionate about their issue, but they would never give us the ask, and we just didn't know what they wanted. And a lot of times we would have to kind of pull that from them. Um, and sometimes, they weren't on the same page when they would meet. And it was just really difficult for us to support them because we just didn't know what direction to go. And then we had to go to our next meeting. So really important to highlight your ask, make it as we used to say in the military, just break it down Barney style. Okay. So we can always remember it. So after the meeting, I think, just it would people will remember you if you write a thank you card or a thank you email. They'll appreciate it. People want to feel appreciated. It's a good way to continue the relationship, continue the conversation. A lot of staffers, they also like to grow their contact list. You know, oh, we just had a briefing on higher education. Who do I know? And they'll reach out to you. We're trying to write a bill about a certain thing. Who can help us endorse this? Contact list, the people that they met. Um, so always good to provide follow-up information. I think in those meetings, if you want to continue the conversation into maybe a bill being written or for helping them formulate a bill, to end the meeting by saying, when is the next time we can meet? Just kind of like put their feet to the fire and say, okay, well, let me check my calendar. Will this time work for you? So own your authority. In this picture here, you have constituents that are testifying. I don't know what they're testifying for, but um, but they're giving their voice to politicians. You know, Politicians are experts in getting elected. You are experts in education access. Legislators do need us, whether they know it or not. Okay. And as their constituents, you do have power. It's our voices, as cliche as it may sound, it's our democracy that is incumbent on our voices to be heard so that we can ensure that we get what we need. And a lot of times it's a slow moving train to make that happen. Um, so for the person that wants to start advocating more in their professional role, what advice do you have for them? So this was from a SACAT presentation from the government relations team. And I believe this is another educator counselor. This person said, change is slow. Do not get discouraged if things do not change immediately. There's a lot of red tape in the world of higher education that sometimes can slow down processes. However, there are lots of other advocates who can help speed up the process if given the opportunity. Um, this is a wonderful man that I had the privilege of taking his class in grad school, Marshall Gans. Um, and he teaches about grassroots movements, and he's a former organizer for Cesar Chavez and a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee during the Civil Rights era. And his big thing was that, we're not trying to start a revolution here, but, we're movements or advocacy is all about narratives. Um, so, movements, as he says here, have narratives. They tell stories because they are not just about rearranging politics. They also rearrange meaning. They're not just about redistributing the goods. They're about figuring out what is good. For the person who wants to start advocating more in the professional role, what advice do you have? Here's another person. Personalize your message. I totally agree with this. Like nothing glazes over legislators and aides' eyes faster than a form letter or a canned repeated message that we've heard a million times. Um, when we kind of sit up straight and listen is when we start hearing the stories. And so going back to what Marshall Gant said, which I think is just good for any advocate that wants to get into this space, is to when you're developing the public narrative as an advocate, there are a variety of stories that when you could get that centerpiece, that synergy of the story, that's what kind of helps move change. There's a story of self, right? My story of self is my mother came from Peru when she was 18, uneducated, did everything she could for me. And I'm very grateful for that. And that's part of the reason why I am very honored to work with Mamas Unidas and help, the Hispanic community. There's a story of us here in Arkansas. We're going to go into this here in a second with some of the top policy things here in Arkansas, and we want to hear your voice on this. And there's a story of now, right? So what is the most important thing when it comes to advocacy? So from this person, anyone can do it. You are the expert, and 99.9% of the time will have more experience in your field than legislators. Just taking the step to get involved and letting go of feeling like I was not qualified was a key first step. I heard that all the time. And you know, how do you feel most effective in your advocacy work? Every conversation matters and can make a difference in advocacy work. Advocacy work is never complete, and it should be viewed as building blocks. Going back to that slide where I showed you just how a bill becomes a law, you can see that's a slow moving machine. Um, but I think it's the committed voice of us to advocate for the things that are important for our students. And if not us, then who? Um, so rhetorical question for you is, who do you advocate for? Um, so I'm going to quickly kind of go over this. These are the NACAC policy pillars, of which SACAC follows as well. And when I go through this, just think of it from the perspective of Arkansas, um, and would love to hear your input in the open discussion regarding these pieces, as well as some of the pieces that Wendell's going to get into as well. Um, so NACAC, Student and Equity Centered Admission Practices, Professional Responsibility and Ethics for College Admissions Counseling Professionals, and Expansion of Capacity and Impact of School Counselors and College Advisors. You know, emphasizing the need of systemically underserved students. What does that look like here in Arkansas? What can we do at the state level for these types of things? Expanding NACAC's policy playing field and building NACAC into a clearinghouse for equity-centered practice. They have a lot of great resources at NACAC, for a lot of this. Ethics in college admissions counseling. What do those ethical practices look like? Communicating standards and ethical guidelines to the public, policymakers, and media, advocating for public policies that emphasize ethics in the college transition. Support for school counselors and college advising. This is something that I don't know, I've become a little more passionate about, just kind of seeing it from my perspective, reducing the student to counselor ratios, providing best practice information in the state and local setting, training practitioners and equipping student or schools to meet the college advising needs of students. I know Wendell and I, we've talked about these issues a lot, and with some other counselors as well. And I would love to hear what you guys think about this and what are some things that we can help advocate at the state level, when it comes to support for school counselors. So NACAC supports, these kind of like their policy agenda: college affordability, student protections against fraud and abuse, DACA Dream Act, global student mobility, and transfer pathways. So if you want to stay up to date with NACAC, they have policy alerts. If you go to the NACAC website and go to Advocacy, there's a section in there where they'll have different like short articles or posts that will talk about certain policies that kind of popped up. You can also follow NACAC Wonk on Twitter, which I have before, especially when the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action came out. I was really curious to see what they had to say. You can also look at their NACAC bulletin and journal, and the website has a wealth of information. So I'll hand this over to Wendell to take us into more of the Arkansas issues. And then after that, we're going to open it up for discussion. But Wendell, it's all yours.
Yep. Hey, Steve, thanks for giving that breadth of information. I know it was a lot to our audience, but we wanted to, before we got into the meat, we wanted to be sure that you are aware of how to prepare. So just as we look at some of the top three issues, we'll get right in it, and I'll be trying to get through it as quick as possible so we can have the questions and the answers that some of our audience have already put in. So affordability and financial aid. college readiness and access to underrepresented and non-traditional students. Access for, I mean, will be kind of the three pieces that we're going to touch today. Next slide. So when we think about affordability and financial aid, it is at the core of how we support our students. It's at the core of how you all are able to do your work. Key pieces like the Arkansas Academic Challenge Scholarship, they help kind of offset the rising costs. But financial aid, FAFSA, is not without its challenges. As you all see in the news, that the revisions made to one, support families and scholars is creating deadline impacts, which ultimately can create enrollment impacts. So, this is a core issue that collectively we must continue to work through, because we know in the work that we do, the aid is invaluable to our students that we serve, and ensuring that everybody can have as much aid as possible is important. Next slide. College readiness. As college counselors and as educators, we know that we're doing the work to prepare them to matriculate, but also be successful once they're there. And then there are a lot of high impact programs that are doing the great work and trying to offset some of the things happening in our local legislation. But we know that we have to continue to dig deep and make sure that these programs are being championed, both through our institutions, but also through our communities, but also beyond our traditional high school counselors. This must be touched and felt throughout the community. And a lot of times when we think of college readiness in preparation to matriculate through, we lean into ensuring that our college counselors who are already working and operating many times at a deficit from a teacher or a counselor to student ratio. So working together collectively on policy and programs is going to be equally important. And then, of course, this is where my heart is, continuing to make sure that access for underrepresented and non-traditional students is available. Again, he led with Steve mentioned the affirmative action in the work, and that it provided the affirmative action in the resources and the funding clearly has been something that has sustained many of the institutional programs throughout our nation, ensuring that we can increase access for underrepresented populations and groups through these programs has been vital. So with that legislation being ripped apart and ultimately other legislation that is potentially coming down the pipeline, we have to collectively figure out how we can corral and advocate to ensure that we don't miss populations of students who are working tremendously hard to matriculate to college. And again, as we talk about the organizations doing many things throughout the community, we wanted to kind of just paint a broad stroke of exemplar community-based organizations for their efforts day in and day out, in spite of Arkansas Commitment, which is a college access leadership development program located here in Central Arkansas. UAMS STEM Pathways Academy is doing exceptional work in our communities. Mamos Unidos, which is one that Steve and Miss Carmona Job are doing excellent work serving the community. Obviously, Waypoint College Consulting. I want to give a shout out to the ACT Academy at one of our institutions, our flagship institutions, at U of A at the U of A Multicultural Center. They continue day in and day out to do a phenomenal job reaching the masses. Pulaski County Youth Services and also Trio Student Support Services are exemplar organizations doing great grassroots efforts. And I think as we continue to go down this path with um, the cutting and the decimating of legislation that supports underrepresented populations, and just college going populations, it's going to be equally important for our community-based organizations to stand in the gap, and continue to be the backbone of many of our communities that they've been. So, as we work, think of, and again, we just listed a short few. I'm sure there are countless others, but as we continue to do this work, and as Steve has given, given us the tools we need, it's going to be equally important for us to figure out a way to work together, um, to ensure that these community-based organizations can thrive, and hopefully some others can emerge as champions of this work, because I think the grassroots is going to have to be the way, to offset, what is really coming down with legislation. So I could lean into that, but I definitely want to get to the open conversation piece. But we just wanted to kind of paint a picture of some exemplar organizations doing some good work. All right. And obviously we're making it to the end, but we want to hear from you. Um, I think Steve's going to open it up, but,
Yeah,
but we have several questions, and I kind of want to lead with some of these questions, and then we can kind of get to some other open conversations, as we go through our conversation. So, Miss Sarah Drain, she she asked, the question is, why is the ACT score of 19 used to qualify for the Arkansas Academic Challenge, and how and when can we decouple that? That's a great question. Through this research, we spent a lot of time on Arkansas Department of Higher Ed, and they have a productivity funding model that I think supports both 2-year and 4-year institutions, and to address that, we would probably have to really dig in the weeds of that model, and figure out a way, if there is a way to offset that, because we also know that, um, while those scores are important, they also don't tell the whole picture of a student who may not even be able to make the score, but who can do the work. So I love to continue to work with you on that.
yeah, and I also gave access to everyone to be able to speak now. I was just looking at Sarah's question, one that I feel comfortable to answer is it your suggestion to provide a list of actions roadmap with the ask? Yes. So the easier you can make it for legislators and staffers to kind of help create the policy changes that you're looking for, the better it is. I've had people come to us with a bill that was already written with a strategic plan on like who to reach out to, even had like press releases built out for us, understanding like what our stances were and looking at packages like that. We're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And we would use it, it would make it easier for us to kind of push what they're looking for if we agree to, their agenda. So the easier you can make it, um, I think the better. What else?
Sarah also asked, how can anyone on this call form a college access coalition? I love to be involved in this, and there are great models out there for us to get started. And I laugh, because
You
while I'm
know, we
happy,
already had this
yes,
conversation.
no, of course, I
Hi,
laugh,
y'all.
but that is something at the core of me and Steve's
Mhm.
conversations every time we get together. So I think it is pressing, and probably more important more than ever now. So I'm glad you continue to push that conversation, and we'll hope that you continue to stay with us as we try to figure out how we can make some meaningful progress towards building it.
Right. Thanks, Wendell. Yeah, and I totally agree. That's something that we've, we've discussed. Me and Wendell have discussed with, Darren Morgan, and um, So I just think that's something that we'll probably like try to initiate offline outside the scope of SACAC.
Yep.
Just SACAC has its policy priorities and its platform that we're all in line with, right? But there's also a lot of other issues that kind of like overlaps with that. But definitely something that I believe we should move forward with. And Sarah, like I would love to connect with you and everybody else. So maybe we can like send an email out later on about that. But I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions or let me ask this. What are some of the issues um, within the scope of college access and higher education here in Arkansas that you feel are things that need to be discussed um, at the state capitol? Maybe some things that we can raise to the legislators, in our next session with them, with our next SACAC government relations meeting with them. I would love to hear the diversity of thought and experience that is at this meeting right now.
Mhm.
I have some. It's hard for me because I don't see faces. But
Oh,
I
okay.
will. I will. From my perspective, I am the educational coordinator for UAMS Pathways Academy, one of the programs that Wendell mentioned earlier. What, and I've been to a couple of conferences. Particularly, we deal with medical institutions and access to students getting into medical institutions, which then impact patients in our community, the health of our community. It might, to me, it feels as if we are really trying to tackle some of these issues in silos.
Mhm.
And just like Sarah mentioned, the coalition, but there is some things that there's a commonality of understanding like how these things affect our economics
Mhm.
within the state. Our, even if you're looking at the ACT score of 19, that has something to do with adequate education.
Mhm.
And then so I think by visiting at those conferences, if you think about Proposition 209 that happened in California, they gave strategies on how we need to, and one of them was building a coalition. Um, and
Mhm.
because there is some commonality and there's an impact that we all agree on, and I think coming at it from that point um, will help. I feel like I am an expert in my field, but I definitely would feel comfortable if I'm speaking to senators with other grassroots organizations as well to say that we collectively agree on this issue and this is how it impacts this across these individuals across the state. I may have said a lot,
No,
but
good.
I hope y'all able to understand what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
um, it is, to me, it is going to take a group effort to allow I don't know, our legislators to see that it impacts more than a certain group, it impacts
Mhm.
all. So how do
Mhm.
we make
Mhm.
that happen and how do we tell that story
Mhm.
within all of us? Because there is some commonality between all these organizations.
Yeah, that's
That's
right.
it.
Appreciate that call out. I mean, to your point, the economics of it, right? Like, I'm looking at something right now. According to the Lumina Foundation, like we lag behind at 46.2% of the goal of 55% by 2030 for a more uh, career ready, work ready, educational attainment. And to your point, that's going to take all of us trying to figure out how to push that percentage up forward, right? While your pathway is specializing in public health, I would say that college access is equally important to all sectors because without people and highly educated people, these professions would cease to exist.
Wendell, this is Sarah. And just to clarify, I think was that Katina White? Is that who just spoke?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I looked up your email address and just sent you a note on the website. So I look forward to talking with you soon. But Wendell, would you drop that Lumina Foundation link that
Sure,
you just
sure.
referenced in the Q&A or the chat for everybody? Because
Yeah,
it's such a
yeah.
great resource. We've probably all seen it and then have it open as one of
It's glaring.
Apple lets you keep 500 tabs open. So one of some tabs you might have open on your phone or computer.
Yeah.
Thank
In another call out while I'm talking with Sarah, I mean, and again, this is something we talk about, and you've mentioned, Sarah, they do great work, just like UAMS STEM Passport. They touch thousands of students, and what we have to continue to create awareness around the programs that are doing the work, but also have to ensure that they've done the deep work to create the relationships to touch the students. And obviously in the world of education where turnover can be in the droves, we have to, as stakeholders of community, ensure that we're aware so that application pipeline or pathway doesn't close in respective regions that are being supported aren't missed, if that makes sense. I think we want to make sure that we have the strongest application pool from throughout the whole state, and don't miss students because there were gaps in communication or a lack of awareness about the resources, which are free. And I think that's the uniqueness of the exemplar community-based organizations. 90% of them were free services. And I think that's the challenge, right? How do we advocate and champion free services and ensure that we have the strongest application pool possible?
Hey, Wendell, I wanted to add something to Katina's point. I think she makes such an amazing point, and I think something, by the way, my name is Kelly Peck-Gavish, and I'm the Government Relations Chair for the SACAC Board, and I'm so thankful for Wendell and Steve putting this event together. But I love what you brought up, Katina. I think something that's so important in GovRel work is like working smarter and not harder. And I think I'm based in Tennessee, and I think one of the challenges is like finding out what the state's priorities are with the leadership, right? Because like if you're constantly going against the grain too, it's hard to have those victories. And so like in the state of Tennessee, we have free community college for anyone that wants to go for 2 years, but we were having so many students sign up for it but not actually enroll. And so that's really helped in our argument for increasing the counselor to student or decreasing the counselor to student ratio, so that way more counselors can work with students enrolling in that free community college, because that's such a strong initiative from our government in Tennessee. So I think you bring up a point that just made me think, like, sometimes it takes that digging and doing the research into what is the government's priority of the state, even if we maybe don't agree with it fully, in like finding out how we can like work smarter, not harder against that, and like fulfilling our policies. Does that make sense? I hope what I'm saying makes sense. But
I got it. I got it. I got it. I
I
understand it totally.
I really appreciate you bringing up that point. And I think it's like we want to, again, even though we may not agree with everything we're doing, they're doing, we want to like work the most efficiently we can to get
Mhm.
these things done for students.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you bringing up that point.
Mhm.
There's also one thing that Kelly mentioned in the past in other meetings that we've had that I really like, and I think goes along with what she's saying, is while you understand like what the priorities are of the leadership in the Arkansas State House or Senate, is like understanding like how to like formulate your ask to them that kind of like, you know, understand the politics, the political factors that play into the ask, right? I mean, there's might be some times that it's just dead on arrival. But there are other ways to approach it, and that's where really where you have to be strategic, and that's where the research comes into play. Kind of what Kelly's mentioning here,
Mhm.
And you can kind of get a sense of like where they're at when you look at the schedule of committee meetings that they have, or previous committee meetings, or if it's a fiscal year, like where they're thinking about sending money towards, that can give you some hints on, where to do that, or gaining some intel by going to someone who might align with your politics a little bit more and say, what's the other side thinking about, right? Because it's going to take both sides to do it. And in this state, it's going to take a lot of one side to do it. So, just, I think it's a really good point that Kelly makes, and she's made it in the past too. And I remember, Kelly, you mentioned that there was like someone in Tennessee who would like write to different members in different ways. Like she would articulate in certain ways. I really liked when you mentioned that.
Yeah, we actually had a so she works, oh my gosh, she works with a county in Tennessee, but she works for the Tennessee Counseling Association. And she literally, like everything that we had written up to take to our event to do the day, she just changed certain terms in the flyers because she was like, these are so much more approachable for politicians. And they were words that we wouldn't have even thought would be like triggers, but apparently they are. And so I just think like having some of those people overlook your work before you go meet with somebody or your policies that you're proposing is super helpful, because we just didn't know some of that was triggering. And then by having her like look over it and just change simple words, instead, I think it was like, instead of emotional counseling, they made us change it to like mental health counseling, because emotional was triggering for some legislative people. So just some of those like small changes were so big in getting more success of people to sign on. So it's really fascinating.
Thanks, Kelly. Does anyone else have a point that they want to discuss, or an ask that they want to share with us, or a question they may have? Open the table here for all the experience that's at this meeting.
And while we're waiting, I'm putting quite a bit of information in the chat just as a resource for you, that you can use at your discretion or capture. But please, if there are any questions, like he said, we're here to support as best we can. And if the goal is to take the next steps to then have these other deeper conversations, so we can, when we come back, we can say these are things that have taken place since this conversation.
Well, Wendell, if I'll throw a question out there that Sarah asked, and I'll ask this to the greater group. So what more can the Arkansas Department of Education and the Arkansas Department of Higher Education and others do to better inform and advise ACT preparedness across all districts? Only necessary if ACT scores remain attached to state aid and other institutional aid. Wanted to throw that out to everybody. Maybe discussion point.
Big. Well, Sarah, can I ask you, just from your perspective, what do you see?
Yeah, sorry, I was just typing in the Q&A to ask folks to follow our work on Instagram. Well, I think that some context just for the work of our team. We're the College Access Initiative, and we're based here in the Multicultural Center at the U of A. We work to support students across Arkansas to access college if that's what they want to do. No matter where they want to do it. Now, if they want to come to the U of A, amazing. We will gladly connect them with staff who will support them while they're here, and where our team is included too. But one thing we do is provide ACT prep across the state for free. We've been in lots of schools this year, worked with thousands of students so far. These workshops might be anywhere from 45 minutes. You put us in an English class all day and we talk to students for 45 minutes. It might be juniors, days before they're going to take the junior test, or maybe you get us set up with a full day or a Saturday or something like that. It really varies drastically. But what we see largely is that schools really don't have a ton of time dedicated to preparing their students for the ACT. Some schools, like I would say the above and beyond schools, have a semester-long class. You can imagine who is taking that class And it's the students who, not that they don't need the help, but they're students who are, likely to sit down on their first try and get a 23 or a 26 or a 29. And those are just, those students don't need the same type of assistance as students who on their first attempt are going to sit and score a 12 or a 14 or a 16. And so I will say that I don't believe it's a critique of schools or even of districts, because in my opinion, my not so humble opinion, it is a result of the Department of Education and Department of Higher Education in conjunction that have established this essentially a requirement of an ACT score to access money. And for so many students and families in Arkansas, like if you're not getting that state aid, it's prohibitively expensive to go to school. But the requirement of the ACT without really robust ACT preparation from, I would say, from the 7th grade forward, we're just setting students and families up to fall short. We've got students who are getting ready to graduate next month who don't have a 19 on the ACT and don't now feel like there's an avenue for them to get that. And they might even have, there may not have been anyone who told them to try it again or why you should be working towards an ACT. And it just can't come down to be the counselor's responsibility to do that. It can't come down to be the testing coordinator's responsibility to do that. You're going to need to have professional development and education across districts pretty early on and regularly if we're going to continue to maintain this this test as a gatekeeper. And so, school, I think the state paid for everybody to have access to this On to College website. That's not nothing. It's a tool, but you can't just throw a tool at a problem if you don't have the support and education and training for how to use that tool. And then really it's going to take a teacher embedded in a building who's going to say, we're going to use this tool daily or weekly, and here's why. And that's just not happening. It's not happening everywhere. And I would love to see data on what the usage of that site looks like. I would love to know how much money got dumped into that site. I could go on for a really long time about this. I hope you can tell I'm quite passionate about it.
Well, no, you raised some great points. And I would also say, you mentioned the junior ACT test, in my experience with the population that we served, a lot of students, that was their first test. And
their only one.
And
their only one, Wendell.
It's like, it was concerning. And it was like, y'all, we're doing this backwards. Like, this shouldn't be like, if the state is providing this as a junior and they can afford it, they'll have the resources. Like, we are, like you said, we're setting them up for failure. So
well, and I mean, if you want to get into this won't surprise anybody, but if you want to get into how your school, your building level, and your district ACT scores go into play in determining, somebody help me remember what the performance funding, the performance
model.
Right, the extra money you get for meeting certain benchmarks with your students, right? But if ACT scores are going to be linked to that, what does happen, we've seen it happen in our own, right before our faces, but what does happen is going to continue to happen is you're going to have building, I'm going to set an example of a building administrator. We were invited in to do a day-long ACT prep with all the English classes, and in the AP classes and the pre-AP classes, the person came in and really encouraged the students, talked about how important it was, what opportunities were available to them as a result. Right, great. The message was extremely different for the English language learners, and the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language learners. And the classes that were populated by English language not AP students and largely students of color. They were reminded that they could opt out of the test. And so as long, I mean, that's real gross, but that is happening. Our staff has seen that happen. And then we see it also happen in maybe less explicit ways by who gets access to the opportunities for preparation, right? Yeah, I'm gonna stop because I think that probably Steve's advice would be, Sarah, you need to work on your on your tone and your messaging for your ask, because I'm just pretty disillusioned and disappointed. But I need to hold fast to the opportunities and ways we can improve, because they are vast and they're possible, right?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback. I have one of the ways in which, for me, as we're trying to navigate strategically. I actually work with a college student in the last 2 years where she's done some public health research, and one of those last year was what is the relationship between school district educational resources, student outcomes, and socioeconomic status, where she connected access to healthcare to the impact of access to educational resources and how it affected students in different areas around the state. And she was able to get those numbers in the court and find some correlations that it's not that underrepresented groups are not taking pre-AP or advanced courses. What's happening is still, because of the educational resources that they don't have access to, that they are still scoring lower than the northwest part of the state. And we've utilized on that. I think also is if there is a way to partner with research institutions to actually see how this is affecting, and that will help us garner more of a story and more of and getting justification as to why these access or engagement opportunities are needed. And that's what we're using as part of why Pathways Academy needs to exist. So I don't know, I'm saying a lot, but it just helps to have some research to back up why we need to exist. And that's where I'm coming to, and that's what they were suggested in combating Proposition 209, is having that data and that research and then connecting it to what the state needs. And I feel like that we can do that collectively.
I was just about to say, Wendell and Steve, like y'all have some passionate people here. I think Sarah, you said something about you need to stop. I don't think you need to stop. Y'all just need to decide, I think, what kind of like the NACAC pillars and SACAC pillars that Steve hit on. I think y'all just need to decide, okay, like we can have NACAC in our back corner, we can have SACAC in our back corner, in our back pocket to help us get all this research. Because I mean, NACAC has full-time people that will pull that research together for you and help you with some of the research numbers y'all already have, and just deciding kind of what focus you want to zone in on and put all that energy into that. I think that's where you don't stop, just pick a pick a point and like focus all on that. And I think y'all could get some stuff changed. Like y'all sound really passionate and I love it.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. And, saying goes, squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I think if we can all be a larger squeaky wheel, I think it's really important. So no, Sarah, I think you're on point. And, Katina as well. And I'm sure there are a lot of others out there that, I feel like everybody I've discussed, it's like we need to form a coalition. And we're all in our silos. We all are busy and on different things that we do, but I think we all have similar hearts. So
Yeah.
And Steve, y'all can like I heard you respond to this a little bit earlier. I mean, y'all could expand upon your committee, of course, for gov relations for Arkansas. I know y'all maybe want to form a whole coalition eventually, but I mean, that is something you can definitely umbrella under SACAC, and y'all could kind of start this work in this committee and then branch on from there.
That's great.
that is great.
Yeah.
And definitely something that I would love to move forward on. I mean, we have a list of contacts for this meeting,
Yeah.
as well as other SACAC members just kind of floating the idea out there and actually putting, like I said in my presentation part, when's the next meeting? Seriously, like when's the next meeting for us to start maybe forming this type of coalition, if that's something that everyone's amenable to. Of course, I think everyone will have kind of a different nuanced version of it, but we can all compromise on something that will affect greater change for Arkansas. And I think we could all, I'm safe to feel like we can all agree to that. So something that I think Wendell, I'm gonna like speak for you a little bit here, but I think we could probably generate an email and send it out to folks here in the next week or so, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So,
Yeah, man.
yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
Well, hey, Sarah knows me enough. Katina knows me enough. They are all for some community engagement. So,
Yeah.
which is great, a great prelude to the next slide. Next steps. Obviously, this work is so important, and one of the other ways to be involved, beyond government affairs, is get involved with our SACAC state and local initiatives. We have our state and area initiative co-chairs, Nicole Griffin and Rebecca Bailey in Central Arkansas, and they support continued state meetings and drive-in workshops to support professional development. I know we hit home on this work is broader than just our college counselors, and they create opportunities for professional development for community and educators, right? So if you have some champions that could be involved, and maybe not have the time that you have, but can go get some professional development, let's send them to that information. I think there are scholarship opportunities available as well, that we'll be more than happy to help support and champion. Obviously, continue to connect with us. I think we got some great meat here, and I'm always looking for the next meeting. I'm that's just kind of how I am. And what I would ask is if you all have meetings that we need to be a part of, because I think that's the other piece, right? We're all doing stuff, and some of it is just about being visible in your space to bring it back to a SACAC, to bring it back to our, local representatives. But because it all intersects, let's be clear. And myself and Sarah were talking about some meeting times between now and when school starts, in potentially basing them around key and priority educational events, where we can all kind of be a part of the bigger conversation. Because I think, the ACT, SAT piece is going to be a driver for all institutions. And that's something that anybody can get behind a conversation about. Well, what are we doing to ensure that everybody has not just the access, but the resources to thrive once they're in it? So I'm open to any time to talk about that, talk about things that you all are doing now that we can kind of put within this government affairs wheelhouse. And the other piece, join. SACAC offers a variety of free resources. If you're in a public high school and or doing community-based work through your organization, there are a variety of free resources. As I mentioned, professional development opportunities, conferences, and a variety of other great opportunities to get involved. It's as simple as going on to the Join SACAC, and I can put that link in the chat as well. And that can be a great way for us to continue this amazing conversation. I'm being really called for this coalition piece. And I think, we got some real great opportunities between now and the next school year to really move some things forward.
Yeah, thanks, Wendell. So yeah, we will send it out an email. Sarah volunteered, so I might send you the contact with Sarah. But yeah, we will send something out, and we would like to continue this conversation, and we would like for this to kind of form into something where we can actually advocate. Because I feel like every conversation I have with different counselors is just they're in their silo. They want to form a coalition.
Yeah. And I would say not like think beyond the counselor piece, right? Like let's
Right.
think community, let's think grassroots. Who are the people advocating for education? Probably more than the educator during the day-to-day. Let's make sure they're aware. And some of this is about empowering and increasing their capacity to then support the work that we so have to do.
Great. Well, Wendell, anything more, or does anybody have any questions, comments, last minute discussion points before we wrap up? Now's your last chance.
Wendell and Steve.
This is, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, y'all are volunteers. Thank you for doing this. We're so appreciative. I'm appreciative. Y'all rock. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Definite sincere thank you. I just typed it in the email. I'm about to hit send on to you. And for anyone who's on here and you're working with especially high school seniors, current college students, our team is doing some FAFSA support drop-ins. There's no need to register. I think they're all on our Instagram. We have them coming up over the next couple of weeks, just as one small thing to do to support more students completing that FAFSA. Since FAFSA completion is so significantly down, especially among many of the populations we've talked about on the call today, and that all of you are working to serve. And so I just appreciate your work in doing that. And as we can assist, we want to, and we're ready. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Well, I don't have anything else. Wendell?
Hey, thank you all for making time today. You could be anywhere, but you're here. For those who don't have my information, I can share my email in the chat. We appreciate you so much. And in the words of Miss Karama Neal, we have so much more work to do.
Yes.
Yes.
So much more work to do. So with that being said, we appreciate you all. There are no other words.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Awesome.
Crushed it, bro.
Yeah, man. Totally crushed it. Thanks, man. That was good.
No, I mean, and sometimes it's like the 10, the 8 to 9 is the best. Like you don't need 20, you don't need 30.
Yeah, no, that was a great number. Being able to have that conversation.
I sent it to Katina. She's an advocate for sure.
Yeah,
And
you can tell.
in the whole public health piece is a great spin on all this. Sarah is doing great work.
Is she the one that was potentially going to? Okay.
But she's about it, and I think I would say the next time you're in Fayetteville, make that connection. She will. She's just a great resource for sure. So
That's great.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. Cool. Well, this has been great, man. Thanks for all your help with it, and yeah, we really want to move forward with that coalition building at some point.
I know, bro, and it's just it's been on my heart. It's like, dang.
Yeah.
I think some of this is how do we make time. I keep going back to like a college access pod, man. Like just rooting it in sharing a podcast, sharing it,